Good morning. We are so glad that all of you are here to show your appreciation to the men and women who have worn the uniforms of our nation's military. As a veteran, I know the honor you feel for the privilege of serving alongside your comrades. It is indeed a special bond. Before I go any further, I would like to ask all the veterans to please stand. Please. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. You may be seated for now. I would like to welcome all of you to our ceremony in honor of these patriots. It is right and proper that we are gathered here today to celebrate their service to our country. If not for them and the others who have gone before, we would not be able to assemble here today, and we would not be allowed many other freedoms this nation provides its citizens. At this time, I would like to thank the members of the Calhoun administration for all the support they give to this program each year. And now I would like to invite Calhoun's president, Dr. Joe Burke, to come forward to deliver his welcome to all of you. Dr. Burke.
Thank you, Dr. Cross, and I appreciate all of you being here. I know we have some lots of students here, and that's great. Good to see y'all from your classes. Appreciate the instructors encouraging your attendance here. These occasions like this, particularly Veterans Day, I think is important for us to observe, and in many cases, as they say, a lot of times, 50% of a job is just showing up, is just to show up at these occasions where we honor veterans, because it is a time for us to pay respects to those who have served. This is should not be viewed just as a holiday, a day off from work, but our forefathers set aside this day for us to particularly recognize and celebrate, honor our veterans for their patriotism, their love of our country, and their willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. Sometimes I need a refresher course in history in Veterans Day and all the meaning that is involved with Veterans Day. And many of you know this, that it originally began as Armistice Day on November the 11th, 1919, which is the first anniversary at the end of World War I. Also, I noticed too that there are a lot of veterans. As of 2018, there are 18.2 million living veterans who served during at least one war. 9% of veterans are women, 7 million served during the Vietnam War, 3 million during the War on Terrorism, 16 million served during World War II. 496,000 or so are still alive of the World War II veterans as of 2018. What can we do to observe Veterans Day? Well, we can say thank you to our veterans for their service. All of us personally know a veteran. They are our family members, our neighbors. We can write them a note of thanks. We can fly our flag properly and show respect to it. We can talk to a veteran about their service or treat a veteran to lunch or coffee. Support veteran-owned companies. And as I mentioned earlier, we can attend the Veterans Day Parade or other events, or even volunteer at a facility, or donate to a facility that takes care of our veterans and sees to their needs. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all who are on our program today. Looking forward to the next few minutes and what we're going to hear from our guests. So welcome to Calhoun, and thank you again for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. At this time, I would ask you all, if you don't mind, to please stand for the presentation of colors by the Columbia High School Junior ROTC under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Eugene.
Left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, left. March, march. Color guard, halt. Left wheel, march. Present, arm.
We are honored this morning to have with us Mr. Mitchell Byrd, who's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Mr. Byrd is a member of the Calhoun staff and a Vietnam veteran in the United States Air Force. Mr. Byrd, would you please come forward?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you would, remain standing while the Calhoun Chorale, under the direction of Mr. Oldham, sings.
Was so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose were stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please,
Order, arm.
please remain standing while the colors vacate the floor.
Right wheel, march. Forward, march. Left, 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 right. Left, 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 right. March, march. Color guard, off. Order, color. Color guard, fall up.
Would you please be seated? We have a treat right now. We have several students at Calhoun who are veterans, And I always enjoy having them in my classes. They always spice it up and have good stories to tell and interesting episodes in their lives to write about. And our speaker this morning is no exception. This year we are pleased to have with us a Calhoun student, Mr. John Cairns, who is a retired Sergeant First Class from the United States Army. And he will now come forward and deliver his remarks. John.
Thank you, Doctor. Good morning. Welcome, distinguished guests, family, friends, fellow students, and veterans. I'm honored to stand before you here today. I served in the United States Army for over 20 years. I'm a veteran of both Iraqi freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom in the War on Terror. I spent most of my adult life serving the Constitution and the people of the United States, and I had grown quite accustomed to that way of life. Unfortunately, all chapters of life must eventually come to an end and give way to new ones, and so I retired from active duty in June of 2018. I found myself at a crossroad in life, looking to reinvent myself and remain relevant by continuing to serve others. The importance of education had always been evident since my youth, and I have systematically worked towards obtaining a degree for some time now, where life always seemed to get in the way. Deployments, children, and various other requirements always seemed to keep that goal just out of reach. At the sunset of my military career, I found within myself a renewed determination to finish what I had started, to finish my degree. As fate would have it, my two sons were also at the high school college transition. I had to convince them as well that as a key component to obtaining a successful and rewarding career begins with their education. I felt this would be a hard sell due to the fact I had not completed mine. So I decided the best way to convince them would be lead by example. So in the fall of 2018, my sons and I decided to begin that journey at Calhoun Community College. This would be a new and challenging venture for a variety of reasons. I had no in-classroom college experience, and the simultaneous transition back to civilian life was full of uncertainties. The process alone, such as building a schedule or activating my post-9/11 GI benefits, was entirely unknown. I must say the professional staff here at Calhoun made that transition as painless as possible by helping me navigate through that process for both myself and my two sons. I often wondered if I would be a fish out of water due to the fact that most of my student peer group were the age of my sons. I quickly discovered that could not have been further from the truth. And we were well received by the dedicated instructors here at Calhoun. We felt right at home. I feel extremely blessed to be able to continue my dream of pursuing a college education alongside my two sons after being absent for a large period of their lives. Calhoun Community College has a unique mission here in the Huntsville-Redstone, Arsenal greater area. Calhoun strives to provide quality education and training to meet the ever-growing demands of a rapidly developing, manufacturally, and technically diverse community. There's also a sizable population of veterans like myself that require quality but affordable education options. Currently, there are over 433 veterans and their dependents attending Calhoun Community College, studying a wide variety of concentrations. My two sons and I represent just 3 of them. They are men and women who have served and who are now being served by Calhoun as they transition to positions with their civilian counterparts. As of 2019, there are approximately 3.5 million post-9/11 veterans nationwide. The transition back to civilian life, or simply transitioning to a different career field, can be a source of much anxiety. A service member's strength comes from the knowledge that whatever occurs, their homes and their families are taken care of. What better way to honor our veterans than by giving them an opportunity to excel while working towards a promise of a successful tomorrow? Veterans are an invaluable asset to the community, and I feel that Calhoun recognizes that fact. They are your community leaders, entrepreneurs, police, firemen, teachers, and technical professionals. They possess leadership qualities such as loyalty, duty, selfless service, and integrity. Let us take pause as we remember all the sacrifices made by our service members on this Veterans Day. And let us celebrate the unique virtues they bring to our schools and community. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much. John, we appreciate your service and we appreciate your remarks this morning. Calhoun is honored to have as our keynote speaker this year United States Army Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence E. Sturgis, retired. A graduate of the University of North Alabama, Colonel Sturgis has completed numerous military courses of study. He entered active duty in 1965 and served for 3.5 years with the 24th Infantry Division Mechanized in Germany and in Fort Riley, Kansas. He also served 15 years with the U.S. Army Reserve. Colonel Sturgis has worked in commercial banking for 31 years and is currently a financial advisor with Raymond James. He and his truly wonderful wife, Mary, have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. I am pleased to present to you at this time my good friend and comrade, Lieutenant Colonel Larry Sturgis.
Well, good morning. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I can't help but say that I'm just terribly impressed by the way this student body looks. And I'm awfully glad to see young people engaged in education, and I think you've selected a good place to get that education, and I wish you well. We need folks like you in our country, and I certainly appreciate what you're doing. I'd like to thank Dr. Burke and Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mr. Cross. He's got several names, and those are 3 of the nicer ones. And Carla Sweeney for all her work trying to put this together, and others that have supported this event. At 11 a.m., November the 11th, 1918, the armistice was signed, ending the First World War. This day was celebrated as Armistice Day until 1954, when President Dwight Eisenhower approved the change to Veterans Day. So we now recognize and honor those who have served our country by wearing the uniform of our armed forces. I think this is quite proper and something we should do throughout the year. These men and women have given up a good portion of their lives, their comfort, their safety, close association with family members, and much more in order to protect our way of life. But there's another group of citizens that I'd like to recognize for their service and sacrifice. Dixie Marie Talley Schweitzer was born in 1887 in North Louisiana. She gave birth to 6 children, 2 sons and 4 daughters, one of which was my mother. When the United States entered the Second World War, my grandmother was 54 years old and the matriarch of the family. Just think of this. Both of her sons and all 3 of her sons-in-law were serving in the Pacific Theater during the Second War. 4 of them were in the Navy, while one, my father, was in the Army. And 2 of her daughters had very small children, one of which was me. So, as a single woman separated from my grandfather, she had a living to make. She had the worry of a mother with 2 sons in the Pacific and 3 daughters with husbands in the same combat zone. I think her experiences of living through the Great Depression must have helped her cope with these challenges. Slow and limited communication made for heightened anxiety and worry. course, there was no cable news nor cell phones. And at 6 p.m. most every evening, she, along with the rest of the nation, gathered around the radio to listen to the latest news presented by the likes of Walter Winchell and Edward R. Murrow. Y'all might want to Google that. Walter Winchell and Edward R. Murrow. Dr. Cross may ask you about that sometime. He's that kind of guy. The sheer weight of worry and responsibility of family leadership must have been overwhelming. As the war ended, 4 of the men returned home in relatively good order. One, her older son, suffered what was known then as shell shock, having 3 ships torpedoed under him and sunk. Unfortunately, he needed mental health care for the balance of his life. We called her Mamaw, a truly tough, resilient, and loving grandmother. Julia Compton Moore was born to Colonel and Mrs. Lewis J. Compton at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in February 1929. 20 years later, she married Harold G. Moore. You'll remember him as the commander of the 1st of the 7th Cav, engaged in the Battle of Eodrong Valley in November of 1965. This violent engagement was portrayed in the movie We Were Soldiers in 2002, starring Mel Gibson. Ms. Moore, who Lieutenant General Moore referred to as Julie, was very engaged as an Army wife. Beyond the responsibility of raising 5 children, 2 of which became Army officers, Ms. Moore was involved in Army life by serving as a Brownie and Girl Scout leader and the Cub Scout den mother. Also, she volunteered with the Red Cross in Army hospitals and supported daycare centers and worked with wives clubs to assist enlisted soldiers and their families. During the, and before the 1960s, the means of notification of the death of a soldier was by delivery of a Western Union telegram. Western Union telegram, something else you might Google. This was delivered by a taxi cab driver. A shocking and harsh experience indeed. Ms. Moore changed that practice. To this day, the military has a uniformed officer and a chaplain deliver the terrible news. Also, these notification teams make certain that the grieving widows and families are aware of the services the military offers for this most difficult time. In her honor, the Julia Compton Moore Award was established to recognize the civilian spouses of soldiers for outstanding contributions to the United States Army. Both Ms. Moore and her husband, Lieutenant General Hal Moore, are buried at the Fort Benning Cemetery in Fort Benning, Georgia. There's another lady who I think should be recognized. At age 22, she and her newly commissioned husband left their hometown for his training in Texas. 6 months later, they found themselves in southern Germany without a place to live. For some reason, the military housing system failed to provide temporary accommodations. Eventually, things got worked out, and this lady's apartment became the gathering place for other officers' wives. Soon after she pulled open the window drapes, the neighbors showed up with coffee and whatever else to celebrate and talk and do what wives do. Friends were made quickly in the service, and her hospitality served to validate that phenomenon. Several times during the next 3 years, she and her husband were separated for often 6 weeks at a time. Many times she wasn't sure where he was or what he was doing. During these times, she managed the family finances, maintained and even improved their housing, and handled other situations not normally in her role. You'll remember that the Cold War in the 1960s was really pretty hot. Our president was Lyndon Johnson, and the USSR was led by Leonid Brezhnev and Alexei Kosygin. On the western side of the border between West Germany and East Germany, Czechoslovakia and Poland, the United States had 5 divisions. The Russians and their allies had 125 divisions. The threat of nuclear and conventional conflict was ever present. NATO alert drills were conducted and military dependents were told to be prepared to evacuate their quarters and move toward France. This was a fairly threatening environment for a young woman to face, often alone. Because telephone service was very expensive and awkward at best, she didn't speak to her parents for all of this time. The U.S. mail service had to suffice. After about 3 years, she and her husband were transferred to the remote post known as Fort Riley, Kansas. I can't tell you the anecdotes and funny and odd stories that were generated by that posting. But once again, she spent many hours alone or with neighbors. Beyond that, nevertheless, pregnancy was visited upon her in the spring of 1968. That condition, along with other matters, prompted the decision to be removed from active duty. So in August of that year, she and her husband, captain at that time, returned to Alabama, pregnant, no job, no insurance, and no home. A leap of faith is a term that comes to mind, and also a leap of ignorance, it seems to me. 2 years later, they joined the Army Reserve System in Birmingham, Alabama, and for the next several years, 25 or so, were marked by weekend drills, sometimes 2 a month, 2-week separations because of field training exercises conducted along the eastern seaboard from New Hampshire to Puerto Rico. So again, she managed a family of 2 children with all the sports and spiritual, academic, health, maturing issues that come to active young people, pretty much alone. This with no complaints and in full support of her husband. A perfect Army wife she was, right here. My wife, Mary. So, excuse me, let me close by mentioning that our country is served by thousands and thousands of women. Now, I'm not necessarily a male chauvinist, but I come from that time, so you have to overlook and forgive some of this. But thousands and thousands of women, much like I have described this morning. And I cannot tell you how critically important the contributions and sacrifices of these patriots are for the success of our armed forces. I deeply feel that their service deserves full recognition and certainly our gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel and Miss Mary. As the chorale is coming back around, we're about to a close here, and we're going to have something we hope is entertaining to you. And what I'm going to do first, while they're still coming in, since the term Armistice Day has been brought up a couple of times in the ending of the First World War, I can't help the fact that I'm a sort of English teacher. Not a real one, of course, but as my students could tell you. But there have been a lot of talented people in uniform, and during the First World War, one of the English soldiers, Wilfred Owen, wrote the most popular poem to come out of the First World War, called Dulce et Decorum Est. And some of you are mouthing it out there, Cat, I can see you. During the Second World War, the most famous poem to come out of that conflict was written by an American soldier. He was actually an airman with the Royal Canadian Air Force, but he was an American and he joined the Air Force in Canada. And his name is John Gillespie McGee Jr. And for those of you old enough to remember when the television signed off the air at midnight, the national anthem played, and then you may recall on that black and white television, a United States Air Force jet would come sailing across the screen, and then a disembodied voice would quote the most famous poem to come out of the Second World War. It's called High Flight. It's short, but I would like to read it to you. Again, it was written by the American John Gillespie McGee Jr., who was killed in a mid-air collision in Europe at 19 years old. Wilfred Owen was just a boy, too, when he died in the First World War. But this is John Gillespie McGee Jr.'s poem, High Flight. And again, those of you who grew up when I did have seen it on television a lot of times. And again, don't forget, he was dead at 19 and had already done this. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I have climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind, I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. And right now, as we close, we're going to have something that I always look forward to in this presentation. The Calhoun Chorale. And by the way, before we can keep them just their pause, could we have a hand for the chorale? And so now the chorale will sing a medley of service songs. And we ask all veterans to show your pride in your branch and stand when you hear your song. You will know it. And thanks to Mr. Newt Johnson, who's coming in. Mr. Granville Holden.
Farewell to college joys we sail.
that didn't get you, you can't get got. Sorry. All right. Finally, allow me once again to thank our Calhoun administration, and we sincerely mean that, Dr. Burke, and to all of your employees in the administration. We also would like to thank Dr. Patricia Wilson, the Vice President of Student Services, and her contributions each year to this program. None of this program would have been possible, however, without the efforts of Miss Carla Swinney, and she's going to whip me for saying this afterwards because she's too modest. But Miss Swinney, you see Miss Swinney over there. Most of all, we thank all of you for attending, and we once again thank our veterans for the freedom that all of us cherish today. And thank you all. Colonel Sturgis, would you mind coming forward? Calhoun would like to present this token of our appreciation to you for being here today. And could we again have a hand for Colonel Sturgis?